Hey students, this week we are going to be moving to our next reading, which is the Crucible. Now in the previous weeks we have read The Scarlet Letter, and in that novel we saw how Hawthorne criticizes what he sees as hypocrisy in the Puritan culture. And depending on which pathway you were in, you approach this from one of two ways. The first way for pathway A was by focusing on the Puritan culture itself, by reading Edwards and Bradstreet and Mather and Hale in order to determine what it is the Puritans believed and why they acted the way that they did. But if you're in pathway C, you approached by focusing on the U.S. prison system. You did this by looking at how it developed and how that development has led to some problems today. Now with the Crucible, the project that we'll have is we're going to recreate the Salem witch trials. And in order to do this, we're going to utilize evidence from the Crucible. In the Crucible, a group of girls begin to accuse other people within the town of Salem of witchcraft, and they're led by the eldest girl, Abigail Williams. Now, in the plot of the Crucible, we actually will see a lot of similarities to the Scarlet Letter, which is why these books are being taught in unison within the same unit. So within the Scarlet Letter, we know that it was written in the Romantic period, and Hawthorne, a Romantic writer who utilized Gothic and Transcendental styles, criticized the much harsher, stern, austere Puritan culture as restrictive of individuals. Similarly, in the Crucible, Miller is also criticizing the same aspects of the Puritan culture, except he's doing it from a different time period, a more recent time period, which is called the Modern period, which occurred in the 1940s and 50s. However, his goal is more complex than Hawthorne. While Miller is, yes, criticizing the Puritan culture that caused the Salem witch trials to occur, he's also criticizing something called the Red Scare, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But ultimately, what the two novels have in common is that they point out how hypocrisy of society can lead to hysteria in a society, and how dangerous that can be for all people involved. Now, the Red Scare is also called McCarthyism, and what it is was it was an intense fear shared by U.S. citizens and also the U.S. government that communism, specifically Russian communism, was going to infiltrate the U.S. government and cause the overthrow of democracy. And so the Crucible is an allegory for this McCarthyism or this Red Scare. Now, an allegory is a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. So aspects of the Crucible will directly parallel with historical aspects of the Red Scare in order to, through this really complex use of symbolism, offer criticism to those political events that occurred. Now, what what Miller wanted to point out was to draw parallels between the unjust Salem witch trials of 1692 and the Red Scare from 1948 to 1956. He saw the hypocrisy and the hysteria as being very similar, and therefore the Salem witch trials was an opportunity to better understand why the Red Scare was occurring and how it could be stopped. And therefore, he wrote the Crucible to make a powerful statement about the dangers of hysteria and the dehumanization that can result from it. Now, you can learn more about McCarthy trials, and you will learn more about McCarthy trials, but let me give you just some foundational ideas on it. So this is Joseph McCarthy, and what he said was the following: I have here in my hand a list of 205 people that were known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, and who nevertheless are still working and shaping the policy of the State Department. And so with this statement, he gained a great deal of fame and power because he suggested that he had privileged information as to where communists were in our own government and that he alone could stop it. However, the problem is that he was using false evidence. He didn't actually have this list of names. And therefore, when he went on his own version of a witch hunt, he was essentially accusing people who were innocent so that he could maintain his own fame and power. Now, U.S. citizens fell into this trap, and they became hysterical over the concept that communism could take over the United States, and therefore they came up with slogans such as "better dead than red," in which they were looking for the imprisonment, the punishment, and possibly the execution of supposed communist spies within the U.S. government. And so we see the linking of that hysteria between the Red Scare and the Salem witch trials. And what's really ironic about the McCarthy trials is that while they claim to protect the concept of democracy from communism, they ironically oppose democracy, specifically by violating the First Amendment, in which people were punished for using their right of free speech by being called communists when they had no intention of overthrowing the government. So as I said, you'll be able to learn more about the McCarthy trials, and you'll do that through this challenge focus located right here. So one of your tasks after you watch this video will be to look at that assessment and to study more on the McCarthy trials to help you better understand the Crucible writing itself. Now, a big part of understanding the Crucible will be actually reading the Crucible and using the Crucible to prepare for our trial. In order to do this, you'll be able to find your reading notes in this unit right here, which will be called Scarlet Letter Part 2. Some important things you should note are the unit calendar that's listed in that unit. You'll want to access that. And also you'll want to use the Collect Reading Notes from the Text option right here. So if you click on that, it'll bring you to right here, Collect Reading Notes from the Text. It's a checkpoint. And when you click on that item, it will give you your own version of this document, which is where you'll keep your Crucible trial notes. And in the trial notes, you'll focus on 3 things. You'll focus on evidence that will either prove Abigail Williams is innocent or guilty. You'll focus on the development of major characters, and you'll also focus on instances of justice and injustice in the play. And you'll do these 3 tasks 4 times, 1 for each of the acts. So you'll keep up with these notes as we read the novel in and outside of class. Now let's return to our presentation. So before you begin reading, I do want for you to get to know the characters a little better, so that when you meet them in the play, you're already a little familiar with who they are and why they're important to our trial. So our first character is going to be Abigail Williams, and she is our defendant. So Abigail Williams was a powerful individual who did not have a great deal of power. She was powerful in personality, but in society, she didn't have a lot of power. She had a very low social status, and she wanted to gain more power within her own society. And she did this by accusing others of witchcraft and leading a group of her friends to do the same. Which is why, because she led in the accusations, that she's being brought to trial. And in this trial, you'll have to decide whether she's being honest or manipulative. Did she honestly believe that these people were witches and she was trying to protect the people in her community? Or was she being manipulative and trying to vie for power, even if it meant the death of innocent people? And therefore, that is why she's the defendant. She's the person who either needs to be prosecuted or defended for the crime of 19 counts of murder, because that's how many people were executed for the accusations of witchcraft. Now, one important thing to remember is that Abigail Williams is actually a historical individual. She truly lived. However, there's a significant difference between the historical Abigail Williams and the fictional Abigail Williams, and that is their age. So in history, Abigail Williams led these accusations when she was only 11 years old. However, in the novel, she's going to be 17 years old. This age difference is significant. We can much more hold a 17-year-old responsible for her actions and possible lies than we can an 11-year-old. So we can see why Miller made these changes in the character, because it created a more provocative play that was filled with questions of how hysteria can affect people's perceptions of the truth. So next, let's look at members who will help the prosecution in proving Abigail Williams possibly as guilty. So the first individual that will help the prosecution is the lead witness, John Proctor. And if you want to read more about him, he's right here. But similar to Abigail Williams, John Proctor was actually a real individual historically in the town of Salem. However, similar to Abigail, he also has a different age in reality. In the Salem witch trials, he was actually 60 years of age, but in the play, he's only going to be 30 years of age. And while you read, I want you to consider why it is that Miller changed John Proctor's age. How does it make him a more effective character for what Miller wanted to achieve? Now, John Proctor will be a lead witness in attempting to prove Abigail guilty, or helping the lawyers to do so. Another individual who will help the prosecution is a character witness named Elizabeth Proctor. Now, one thing to note is that she's not a character witness because she's a character in the play. What a character witness is somebody that can assess Abigail Williams' character. Is she a good person or a bad person, and why? And so Elizabeth has special access to this knowledge because she actually employed Abigail in service in her household. You'll also note that Elizabeth Proctor is the wife of John Proctor, and this is true in real life in history. Elizabeth Proctor was John Proctor's wife. She was actually his third wife. So now our next witness that will help the prosecution is an expert witness called Reverend Hale. So an expert witness is somebody who has professional knowledge that they can use to help the prosecution or the defense prove the defendant guilty or innocent. And so you should remember, if you're in Pathway A, Reverend Hale from his writing, A Modern Inquiry into the Nature of Witchcraft. So again, this is a real person in history who actually wrote about the Salem witch trials, but he too will be a character in our play. Now let's talk about the defense. So within the defense, you will have characters who actually want to prove Abigail Williams innocent of the 19 counts of murder. So our first character witness who will help the defense is going to be Paris, who is Abigail's uncle. There will also be Thomas Putnam, who will be a character witness for Abigail, and he's a very powerful citizen in the town, and you can learn more about how awesome of a person he is by reading this. Now, there's also going to be two characters who are undecided. They could go either way in the trial, and that will be up to the students who play these characters to decide what it is that they want to do when giving their testimony on the stand. So the first character that will apply this way is Mary Warren, who is one of Abigail Williams' friends. So she's friends with Abigail Williams. However, she's an eyewitness because she actually witnessed the crimes occur. So she has first-hand knowledge of what actually happened. And a second eyewitness is going to be Tituba. So Tituba in the play is an African slave, but what's interesting is in history she was actually an Arawak South American who was brought to Barbados and then sold into slavery, into the ownership of Paris, who is one of the characters who might help defend Abigail on the stand. Now, the reason why Miller made this change from history to his fictional account is because he wanted to give commentary on the current civil rights struggle that was occurring in the 1950s US. So at that time, there was a big push for equal rights amongst the races, and therefore Miller uses Tituba to criticize how, because of the tension against the fear of communism, how people who were standing up against the government were being called communists when all they wanted was equality. And so he uses Tituba as a means to make this social criticism against the US government that was denying people equal rights. So now, knowing these characters, you'll need to decide what role you want to play in the project. So if you're in Pathway A, you'll be playing one of the characters. Since you've learned so much about the Puritan culture, you have firsthand knowledge as to why these people will act the way that they act. And therefore, you will select which roles you'd like to play. I'd like for you to select 3 if possible, so that I can have a little freedom in giving you exactly what you want. If you're in Pathway C, you'll have the options of playing the prosecution, defense, or a member of the jury. Please just select one of these, the one that you would most like to do. Now, depending on what you pick, you'll have the following responsibilities. So if you choose to be a witness, you'll have your own set of directions. And ultimately what you'll be doing is you will develop, or you'll gather research on your character, you'll write a witness statement, and then you'll film it as a video, and that video will be played during the trial itself, and you have sample videos that you can look at. So know that if you're a witness, those are the tasks that you'll need to complete. If you're a reporter, you'll have a very similar task. You will gather research from the text, and then after you've gathered that information, you will write a news report using literary devices and rhetorical modes, and then you'll record that report, and that will open up the trial so that we have a good understanding of what's occurring. If you are a lawyer, you will need to, again, gather information, but you'll use this information to develop a line of reasoning, either to prove Abigail, that says Antigone, Abigail as innocent or guilty. Then from there, you will prep your witnesses and then write your opening statements and closing statements based upon the prep that you have done. Last but not least, if you're in a jury, what you will do is you will gather information about a trial or law that interests you. And I give you some options, but you can select your own. And then you will create a digital or paper poster, which you'll then use to create a digital video presentation, which again will be shown on the days of the trial. So with those responsibilities in mind, please make sure to fill out your survey and let me know which role you'd like to do. I'll have the roles posted outside the room on Monday for everyone to find out.